Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey bestie, you have such a beautiful smile. You see what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts. You get a bonus greeting and sometimes even an extra compliment on every single episode. So hit that subscribe button and maybe you'll get a nice compliment on the next episode. I am here with the one and only Karen Moore. How's it going, Karen?
I am doing great, Nick. How are you doing?
I'm great. I've been pretty excited to get you on here because we've had you on some webinars, and you're somebody who really loves compliance as much as I do, and you're somebody who has an opinion on everything like I do. So excited to get you on. You have a really so if you guys don't know Karen, she's currently an adjunct professor at Fordham. Teaching, compliance and, corporate strategy type things, but she really has an interesting background. She's worked at 4 massive organizations, global organizations in 4 very different industries that kind of make you're kind of this compliance unicorn because you've seen so much. So really excited to get you on. Maybe we can start with kind of, your path in. I always love to hear how people kind of wind up here, especially people who are so passionate about the industry we're in, because many times we just kind of we don't know about it until we're in it and we're like, oh, I love swimming in this pool. You know what I'm saying? So how did you get into this field?
Yeah, and so true. You don't know it until you're in it, because I like to say I got dragged into compliance backwards through a hedge. And sometimes that's the best way to enter something, right? I mean, other than falling down a rabbit hole, I suppose. But I was really a dedicated lawyer following a really traditional path, first with a law firm, then in-house. And I kind of reached my absolute dream job, which was heading up one of the regional legal teams for a very large multinational, actually based out of Switzerland. So it was even more dreamlike to be in this beautiful environment. And then thanks to geopolitical maneuverings, which continue on till this day, my region, which was Central Europe, disappeared. It got split in between the Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa region and the Western Europe, which then became the EU region. And they had to figure out what to do with me. So the general counsel said, hey, take on compliance. And bear in mind, Nick, this was about 12, 15 years ago. So compliance was still not the sexy thing it is today. And I said, I thought I was doing well. Why am I being punished with this, compliance job that usually got given to people who were kind of on their way out or blocking other people or just needed something to bridge to retirement. And he said, I think you're going to like it, but don't worry, we're going to bring you back into one of the regional roles as soon as, things start shaking out. And I said, okay, fine, I'll do it for the good of the company. And I have not looked back since, because he was 100% right. It was a great place for me. A great place for anybody who's got inquiring minds and likes to be opinionated and a busybody, because there are really no doors that are shut to you when you're compliant, even if you have to kind of shove them.
Yeah, sometimes you have to jiggle that master key you have in those locks, but you can get in wherever.
That's really, and I haven't looked back. I haven't had any desire to go back into a traditional in-house legal role.
So, that's so interesting, right? You're working at this massive company, this division goes away, you've clearly done a good enough job to where they're like, we need to put her in some kind of a holding pattern until we can find another spot for her. You said something, so I want to kind of talk through what that feeling was like, because I'm sure you were like, where am I going to go from here? It sounds like it was a company that you really enjoyed and there were some really cool challenges there, on the legal side. Even as you said, it wasn't as sexy as it is today. But what was it about it that was you said people kind of go there to die or something, but talk to me about how you felt as that thing dissolved and you're like, am I kind of being put out to pasture here? And then talk to me about the revelation you found in there, oh my gosh, I love this pasture.
Yeah, so I think, like I said, it was kind of early days for compliance, but it was also it was a tobacco company. So it was a company that had had its own journey and its own challenges on the ethical front, beyond compliance, beyond a formal kind of, SOX-driven compliance program. And that was something that was really important to me when I joined the company, because joining a tobacco company comes with its own, questions and challenges. And it really, when I looked into it before I accepted the initial offer to join the law department, it really seemed to me that there was a commitment from the person who swept the factory floor up to the CEO in terms of trying to do the right thing, based on a lot of bad mistakes, to be fair, and really kind of forced into it, driven to it, but really now committed. So I joined at a great time. So by the time I got into compliance, the company's idea was we want to be not just compliant with requirements for the law or many different legal regimes, but we want to be really thinking through who we are and reinventing who we are, putting self-restrictions in our marketing practices and really questioning what we do. And to that point, just, through time and attention and money at it, got engaged some really great leaders in the field and people that I still rely on and admire to this day who, helped to drive an effective program. So I came in just at a time where it was like, don't just do what needs to be done, do what we should be doing. And that just created a whole bunch of opportunity for deep thinking and creativity and engaging conversations. So it was a pretty quick conversion, frankly.
It's kind of interesting though to see, like, at that time, a tobacco company really kind of innovating and pushing that kind of compliance forward into the ethics, the kind of aspirational things or sort of the self-limiting things over and above the sort of bare minimum that the law requires. What do you think drove that? Was that a marketing thing? Was it just a heart of the company thing? Do you understand what I'm asking?
It was a nature of the product and a massive settlement with the U.S. State's attorneys general. I think that, frankly, is what drove it. Right? Companies are profit motivating. It's shareholder satisfying entities. Very few companies do things purely altruistically, but I think the nature of tobacco, the Surgeon General warnings, which became increasingly demanding, and then the settlements in the U.S. I was really on the international side, but they really started to drive a lot of action. We started seeing plain packaging initiatives in jurisdictions like Australia and the UK, where cigarettes were being sold under the counter, kind of like the old-fashioned girly magazines. That kind of thing, the dilution of the ability to promote your trademark, restrictions on advertising. So I think that there were a lot of pushes from a lot of different directions, and it was a sustainability issue for the company. It was almost a survival issue. How are we going to survive and thrive? And which, in fact, as a side note, drove a lot of investment into research and development. Can we find a safer cigarette? Can we find alternatives to heat and burn kind of cigarettes, to the point where Philip Morris International, which spun from the US and was the area that I was in, is now saying we shouldn't even be making traditional cigarettes anymore. Everyone should be using these heat not burn products, and lowered risk, and really trying to be the responsible next generation. Let's think of the unimaginable. It's that risk assessment question that companies so rarely ask themselves, which is, what is the absolute material issue for us? What is the annihilation event? For a car company, it would be the unthinkable 10, 20, 30 years ago, which is, we can't make gas guzzling cars anymore. What are we going to do to survive that? And so I was at the very beginning when I joined the company. I was the corporate counsel in Russia, actually, because I was with a law firm in their Moscow office, and I got recruited, and I was in Russia, and the company was trying to kind of bridge the gap between, no, we're doing the right thing and we're forced to do the right thing. And so there was this very careful website language. I don't remember exactly. It was something to the effect of, we defer to the medical community's opinion on the harm of smoking, right? Which eventually then evolved to cigarettes kill you, so, make a smart decision. But they were trying to tread that path. So there's this really convoluted language in English. And one of the things we had to do is make sure that the Russian translation was, cigarettes are addictive in the sense promoted by the medical community, or as defined by the medical community.
Very specific language.
Very, very, it's not addictive like chocolate is addictive, but there isn't that word. In Russian, there is not a word. There's not a distinction. Addictive is addictive. Addictive is like heroin level. And I think the company was trying to suggest that, look, addictive, it's like you can quit. It's just something that we were struggling so hard. So when they finally changed the website language to cigarettes are harmful, cigarettes cause cancer, it was so much easier. but you have to move along a path as a corporation to doing the right thing. It's not a black or white.
No, it's not black or white, and it's it's like surfing. It's like the waves are it's like it's all moving, and you have to just keep kind of adapting to it. It's pretty difficult. So what was that
Well,
like?
and also, sorry, Nick, but
Yeah.
but to make it meaningful, I think there has to be a journey. Much as I don't really like that word, but you see that now in a lot of the greenwashing, right? Like companies
right.
like, oh no, we're really ecologically friendly. It's like, but you haven't gone through any kind of process that makes that meaningful. So there has to be some sort of pain that goes along with that.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, I do.
You're saying kind of like if there's not that pain, then the odds of whatever response really ultimately being greenwashing is like exponentially higher.
Yeah, I think so. Lip service, right? It's easy to pay lip service. You might even convince yourself that you mean it, but demonstrate it, prove it. What have you done to actually demonstrate that this new way of thinking has permeated the organization? And that's where compliance comes in. So I mean, I was just in like the best job ever.
So that's kind of interesting. I mean, we're kind of getting to something philosophical, but it's like, at what point can we make claims? Do we have to have like does the mentality have to like truly change before we start saying we're going to be this thing, or can we say we're going to be this thing and then that's like that sort of clarity of vision is what ends up driving that change in mentality? I don't know. I was a little surprised because I've kind of thought about it the other way, actually.
Yeah, I just think if you're going to say something, then mean it. And if you're going to say something, then put something behind it. It's really easy to say, as one company has, we've reduced our emissions by 96% and earlier than we even planned to. And you look into it, it's like, yes, because when you made those targets, you were a 200,000 person company and now you're a 20,000 person company and COVID happened and you closed down a bunch of offices.
Right.
I mean, there was no reality. It was a result. It was a demonstrable result, right? We were at 100 and now we're at 14 or whatever. But it didn't happen because of actual changes. It happened organically. It didn't happen because you actually did something. So, and I just don't admire that. I think be transparent, be meaningful, but buying a company that does recycling or something doesn't kind of overall reduce your load on the planet. So I'm a little cynical on some of these. And
No.
And they're trying. They're on that journey. All I'm saying is that while you're on your journey, be honest about it. And one of the things I talk to my students about is that kind of evolution from shareholder capitalism towards more like a stakeholder capitalism, that you've got a broader set of entities and people and missions that you're trying to resolve instead of just the shareholder. The shareholder's still important and it's still a money-making company. So, be honest about what you're doing. That's all I'm saying. And then make real efforts. And I think a lot of companies have, and not just in the environmental front, I think in the human rights front and the labor front and all sorts of harm reduction fronts. So, I applaud. I just want to say, be honest and be transparent and be on a pathway to something that's meaningful.
It's such old thinking, I think, that causes us to want to do this greenwashing thing, I think, to your point, So I think you maybe have convinced me. So I think I'm on your camp now. So see how flexible I am? That's amazing. So like you said, be honest and be honest on where you are in your journey and don't take this sort of fake credit for something that sort of circumstantially happened or like, to that point, everyone's working from home. So now our emissions are way lower. That's not anything that you sort of materially did to change your operation or sort of to exhibit your commitment to this particular aspect of your ESG program, for example. It's so interesting because there's this massive conflict, right? There's this conflict where on the one side there's an incentive for a company, a public company in particular, to at least be able to show and say, hey, look, we're really committed to ESG and look at all this data because I'm gonna have a lower cost of capital. I'm probably gonna have like a lower loan cost. I might get more sort of, I'm definitely gonna get more investment dollars because there's a massive proliferation of ESG funds and it's a buzzword right now. So on this side, we have this sort of short-term incentive to greenwash, essentially, right? Let me tell the biggest story I can from just a straight kind of dollars shareholder mentality perspective. But then but it's kind of counterbalanced by this changing sentiment across our economy, I think, where I think we are all well tuned into authenticity, or we're always trying to sniff out inauthenticity. Yes. And I think you can see it across the board. And there have been a couple of stories this year, none off the top of my head, where a company would kind of come out with this certain social stance and then, one side would boycott him, and then the other side would also boycott him because it was kind of
You can't win.
well, but I think it was ultimately like a lukewarm response. So to your point, like if you're going to do it, be authentic about it. And so I think these countervailing forces are causing a lot of organizations to get into trouble. And I think to your point, if you can just focus on a few things authentically and say like, you know what, we can't boil the ocean, but we're going to really focus on a Pareto principle, an 80-20 rule. If I can do X, Y, and Z, or I can focus on, these 3 initiatives, then this is what we're going to focus our efforts on, and we're going to show meaningful progress on that. I think counterintuitively, that is going to really resonate a lot more from a stakeholder perspective, because we all know that not everybody can wave a magic wand and totally fix their environmental footprint. I think what most people are looking for is some authentic, drive toward this ideal that we're all striving toward, a better world, a better workplace, all these kinds of things. And I think when I know that you and I, for example, have an authentic relationship, and I sort of know who you are, and I believe that, I think I have a natural margin of grace for someone, because I know you're a human being just like me, and I'm fallible and you're fallible and so forth. I think organizations have had a hard time tapping into that because it's so hard for them to act authentically in this sort of complex, dynamic that is our economy and our marketplace and all that stuff.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I also have sympathy for companies. Let me also put that out there, because, when I talk about that, kind of concept of stakeholder capitalism, they're trying to satisfy so many different needs, and you can't. And it's not the way you're built. I mean, a company almost by definition is going to be doing harm at the same time that it's doing good. Mm-hmm. You can't operate without having some sort of impact on the community and the environment. And all you can do is make best efforts. They should be genuine. They should be rolled into strategy. They should be rolled into business strategy, not a kind of here's my separate ESG group, just like the way my issue is, here's my separate compliance group. They're going to do compliance and keep us ethical. No, it doesn't work that way. It has to be hardwired, but you have these demands coming from all over, including from a successful business perspective. Right. So investors are starting to ask you, where's your ESG? So you start creating numbers that look good. And then you've got your third party relationships, your customers, saying, oh, you need to have this certification on your environmental impact. And so you start trying to look as good as you can look in the short term, because you have all these demands to do so. And I think that sometimes hampers the long term, because you start thinking, okay, well, I've done enough. And it stops some of the longer term. It's the compliance challenge. It's the culture shift. Right. It's the change in the way the company says, before we acquire a new company, before we open a new factory, before we launch a new product, we're going to look at a whole bunch of things, including environmental impact, including bribery and corruption risks, including all of these things, so that we're satisfying demand in a real way, which is a long-term sustainable growth, which puts me on one of my very old soapboxes, on which I'm not alone, which
Pull
is
it out and hop up on there. Let's hear it.
Let's hear it. Executive compensation is here, right?
Yeah,
executive
short-term
compensation is, the CEO and the CEO's directs are looking at their bonuses in the coming year. I have to demonstrate to the board that I have succeeded in this short-term period. Right. A lot of the things that we're talking about in compliance are not short-term. They don't have short-term returns. They're much longer term. They're harder to measure. They don't always become apparent until somebody lays them out on the table. And I think that that's a compensation issue as well. And if I'm a CEO and my job is on the line and my multi-million-dollar bonus is on the line, I want those numbers to come out right now. And that's across the board. That's on sales, and that's on environmental targets, and that's on compliance targets too. And all these beautiful sustainability reports that companies are putting out that are full of charts. You have to say that there's the short-term gain and there's the longer-term plan as well. And we're seeing it. I don't want to paint companies as not as intentionally misleading or as being entirely superficial. I'm just saying there's a lot. This is complicated. This is not an easy one-year fix.
No, it's not. There's not a lot, or it's not a one-year fix at all. It's absolutely complicated. And, I'm not taking this as super cynical. I think we're just sort of objectively sort of tearing apart some of the dynamics that are at play that are really rooting, or that are rooted behind what we're seeing, It's just such a challenge, because we also have this short-term mentality on I'm a kind of an econ guy, so I'm just saying like we're talking about like the supply side right now, the company side, the companies that are supplying, just from an investment standpoint, they're supplying investment opportunities, they're supplying shares to the market, and so there's some definite like short-term thinking that's causing that supply to maybe be, greenwashed for lack of a better term. But on the demand side, you're also seeing, the same kind of short-term thinking from investors. So investors are like, oh, cool, there's an ESG fund. I'm just going to invest in it. And like, if you look at some of these funds, the only difference between the ESG fund and like the Nasdaq fund or something is like, well, this one just has higher fees. Like the composition is relatively similar. So like, there's not this sort of deep thought on the demand side. There's not this, there's not this deep thought, long-term thinking on the demand side. It's not like you buy a stock now and you hold it for 20 years. And so it's like,
Right.
what comes first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know. I read this book, like which everyone has probably read at this point, called The Infinite Game. And it's by Simon Sinek. And he's talking about, the way to run a business is this over the long term. And that affords you the budget to make those long-term decisions and not have to make sure that every single investment I make now has a payoff within the first quarter because I'm getting that stock price. And there's a ton of like statistical evidence behind companies that say, you know what, I'm not giving any quarterly guidance, and they end up outperforming everybody else because they can make those right decisions over the long term. That takes a philosophical leader or someone who's saying, I'm going to be here for a really long time, that has that commitment to see that whole thing through. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, everybody's so transient and like, this doesn't go well, I can get another job over here and get a great signing bonus. And like, this is happening across organizational sizes. So it's a really hard problem that, to your point, it can't just be fixed with a wave of the magic wand. But I think it becomes incumbent on ultimately investors or, let's just say stakeholders to do that deep think, or to do that deep work or that deep thinking to understand what they're getting involved with and see if that actually aligns with what their true kind of priorities are.
No, I couldn't agree more on that, Nick. And you're right. It's not just the executives and the short-term compensation. It's the investors and their desire for immediate returns.
Correct.
And then it's also the customers who are saying, I need you to be good because I'm looking throughout my supply chain, right? Like and it's not just in the ESG front. Like I see it a lot in the bribery and corruption front, right? There's like this, have you trained I'm doing a session actually for a conference in a couple of days on training. And, one of the things is, training should be meaningful. And I was like, sometimes, training has to check a box, much as those have become really dirty words, because in order to do a third-party supplier kind of questionnaire, it's going to say, have you trained everybody on bribery and corruption? And you're just like, well, everybody doesn't need to be trained on bribery and corruption,
right.
But if there's no opportunity except for yes or no, I'm just going to, I'm going to throw out a 15-minute e-learning to the entire company, even though there are a lot of people who are not making decisions that affect bribery and corruption at all. So there are all sorts of pressures to not do something meaningful here, and they're coming fast and furious. And juggling them is hard. It's why the compliance officer's job is so fun and challenging, because you should be initiating these kind of conversations at the executive level, at the board level, to really try and work through them and affect change, so that there's some pushback. Some of these certifications, and I think that there's some great companies out there now that are certifying different ethics programs and ESG programs as well. But a lot of them also are, very much like, we have to provide something right now that's going to put us in a gold or a green or whatever the standard is, in order to satisfy our clients and our customers. And it's just not meaningful. And the carbon footprint of a company like Goldman Sachs shouldn't be the same priority as the carbon footprint for Delta Airlines.
Yeah, exactly.
There should be a recognition that there are different impacts, there are different priorities. The same thing on, the bribery and corruption side. Some industries lend itself more to them than others, and you put the same emphasis and try and paint them all with the same brush. No. And again, on the positive side, I think a lot of companies are trying to do good things, and a lot of compliance officers are right in there in that conversation, which again makes the job the best job in the world.
I think, like every opportunity, there's sort of an equal and opposite threat. And like on the one side, the threat here is like, there's a high, I'm just using this as shorthand, but like there's a high potential for like greenwashing or like inauthentic conveyance of our commitment to these social governance, whatever, environmental initiatives. But on the other side, to your point, there's a great opportunity for us because like the stuff that we care about is part of the conversation now. And like, it's like the the seas are splitting and we can start kind of getting in there and starting to push that stuff forward. So it's never easy, right? It's never easy to make like a meaningful change in anything. Like you said, any like meaningful growth is going to come with some kind of pain. And so, yeah, it is like a really exciting time, I think, to be like part of this industry. I don't know, like you've been a part of this for a while and you've seen a lot of seasons of it. How do you feel like the industry has moved? Has it been like a lot of ups and downs of undulation? Do you feel like it's been sort of steady and it's starting to like skyrocket now? Like how do you feel the sort of shape of our industry has like progressed over the last 15 years or whatever?
As a profession, because I do
as a
like
profession in general, yeah.
Right, because we're not producing something per se. Yeah, I think it's exponentially gone on a curve, and it's been so fantastic to see. I learn much more than I give, both from my students and from conferences I attend and from meetings I have, whether it's a roundtable with factory workers or sitting at a board meeting. Really, always thinking, always learning what's a better way to do it. The Department of Justice, I mean, the fraud section, initially under Andrew Weissman's leadership and then, ongoing, has just done this tremendous job at starting to say, look, there's standards we need to understand and have expectations of what companies should be doing. And the only sad thing to me is that kind of weird irony that you're benchmarking yourself against something that is only going to come into play really if you are at risk of being convicted of a federal crime. So I find it kind of ironic that we're all like trying to benchmark our programs. But on the other hand, there's this really thought leadership guidance coming out of the regulators that has permeated the profession and I think has generated a lot of really interesting conversations about a meaningful program. And unfortunately, taking something from the DOJ to the board or to executive leadership sometimes is a lot more powerful than just saying, look, let's start because we're doing something, we're building something from scratch. It's like, no, the DOJ is really going to get us unless we do this. And Sarbanes-Oxley requires that we have that. And sometimes you have to run that way. But no, I think the profession has exploded. People come in from all different sectors, which I really love. And compliance is moving away from being a legal function, which I have very strong thoughts about. We're starting to see people with all different skill sets being brought in. If you're building a compliance team, you really need people with so many different perspectives and backgrounds. And the diversity comes from that as much as it comes from people's own experience and their own upbringing.
You said that. You said, unfortunately, sometimes you have to use the DOJ or Sarbanes-Oxley to get the board to move. Why did you use that word, unfortunately?
Well, because, at your heart, you really want people to do the right thing because they believe in doing the right thing. Yeah. And I've learned over time that across the board, that's not always people's first and foremost, right? It was interesting once I went to visit a factory in Malaysia, and we'd had a whole bunch of compliance misconduct there. And I was really trying to understand why. And I met with a whole bunch of the shift workers and different kind of roundtable settings and tried to keep it really informal. And, I said, where are the problems coming from? Why aren't you buying into it? Why aren't you drinking the Kool-Aid the way I've drunk the Kool-Aid, that we're doing these things because it's the right thing to do? And the most powerful response I got was from one young guy. He said, look, I come in here, I do my shift. I come in at 8. I check out at 3. I do my work. Yes, I'm happy. I've got like a clean, safe environment. I'm happy that the company really has given us a good break room and we have nice lunches and snacks available. That's all great. The rest of it, you know what? I just want my paycheck. You tell me what I need to do. If I need to take a training, I'll take a training. If I need to fill in a form, I'll fill in a form. But no, I'm not interested in the rest of this conversation, to be perfectly honest. And first, I took it as a win that he was willing to be that honest with me instead of telling me what he thought I wanted to hear, which is what I encountered so many times. And secondly, it kind of shifted my perspective that, yeah, not everybody needs to buy into everything all the time, as long as they're buying into the right things. And then we had really useful conversations about the problems that we were seeing and why they were arising and what we could do to resolve them. And as a result, we filmed this whole series of a kind of soap opera situational things that people could watch during the break, because that was so much more impactful to them than any of the training we were doing, and kind of snowballed from there. So from there all the way up to, you sit in on an audit committee meeting and you go through the Boeing motion to dismiss decision, which has so many like scary moments for boards and board accountability. And you see people kind of glazing over like, oh, okay, so what are we supposed to do about it? Like you're supposed to do is listen, and what you're supposed to do is care about what's going on. And what you're supposed to do is direct and not just think that somehow I'm going to do this for you, because I can identify risk, but I can't set the risk appetite. You guys need to set the risk appetite, and I will then, permeate the program with it. But you need to provide that kind of direction, find out what those mission critical issues are that are really important to you, and help me apply resources accordingly, because compliance is not the be all and end all of this company. The company is manufacturing something or providing something or advising something, and that's the business of the company. So I need to go along with that in a way that makes sense. So top to bottom, I think, you need to try and understand where people are coming from and meet them where they are.
And I mean, this is probably not an easy question to answer, but when you're, approaching somebody like that, or you're interacting with somebody like that on the shop room floor, let's just call it what it is, they're kind of like compliance apathy is maybe a lower risk, because to your point, not everybody has to buy in, which is a struggle, because like in theory, philosophically, everybody should be doing the right thing, or we at least want everybody to like genuinely want to do the right thing. We can double click on that, and people debate on whether something is the right thing or not the right thing, or if it even matters or whatever. But how do you think about that apathy at the front line versus what you kind of described as some apathy at like the board level, when eyes are glazing over and so forth, or where there's a clear, either there's an apathy issue, or there's a clear like risk appetite issue between what you view as the quote unquote right thing to do from a sort of moral standpoint, or from a just straight risk standpoint, versus the level of risk that the board at large is like able or like willing to take on. Like, how do you bridge that? Because I think it's a conflict. I mean, it's the odds of them being the same number, which obviously it's not a number, but like the odds of them being the same level is zero, right? Or essentially. So how do you bridge that, and how have you sort of developed a muscle to like say, to like act in the context of maybe a risk appetite that maybe is like dissonant to your own or something?
Yeah, and I think when you're talking at the using the factory level as the starting point, and the duty of loyalty at that level is really low. It's like, I'm going to pay you a wage. You come in, work the hours that you're supposed to work, do it safely, do it without harassing people, don't steal things. It's a pretty simplistic thing, but the factory next door offers you $1 more an hour and you're gone, right?
Totally.
So you need to just keep it at that, with that level of understanding that the depth of commitment, the willingness to do something that's inconvenient to you for the good of the company is at a very low bar, right? So sometimes you have to focus maybe more on consequences. You steal raw materials and you're going to get fired, right? It doesn't matter whether that person thinks that stealing the raw materials is right or wrong. There's a consequence, there's a rule, follow the rule. So like being maybe a little bit more clear, rules-based, and keeping things relevant too, right? Like, don't spend a lot of time talking to people about bribery and corruption when they don't have any ability to influence that. But then you get to the board level, and I don't want to say that there's apathy at the board. I think that, and let me also frame this by saying that I've only had limited board experience. So there are a lot of boards out there, and they may not conform to this. But I think in large part, when I talk to my peers at other companies, and I try and ask, what are you presenting to the board? What's important to the board? What data? What conversations are you having? And almost exclusively, you get the kind of like, well, I'm only before the board once a year, or even if they're there every quarter, I get 5 minutes, and I put the numbers out there, and then I'm done, and which has been my experience, like move it on. And actually, I had one experience where the head of the audit committee complained to somebody else that I talked too much in my 10 or 15 minutes. And
How dare you? How dare you take 10 minutes of our time?
I my time between, here's a bunch of data that's important to you, but here are also some developments that might be affecting us. Here's some things coming down the pike. Here's some future risks that maybe we need to think about. Do they affect us or not affect us? Should we be concerned or not concerned? Let's have that conversation. And I think that, so much of compliance gets given to the audit committee, not exclusively, but to the audit committee. And the audit committee, the requirements in a publicly traded company to be on the audit committee is a demonstrable proof that you have good financial acumen, right? Financial acumen is the criteria for being on the audit committee, and it should be, and that should be tested. But then there's no question of like, but what do you understand about compliance, its role in the company, what it can and can't achieve, what are the benefits, what are the downsides, where are the risks, what is my role as a board member, what are the expectations of me in compliance. And, a lot of companies now are wising up and they've got a security committee or a risk committee, and the risk committee should have more experience. But I find often the risk committee is the same people that are in the audit committee, and
Right.
they don't know the right risk questions to ask. So if people aren't asking the right questions and you're trying to give them the answers to questions that they should but haven't asked, I can understand where they're like, okay, next, because we've got a really intense agenda and we've got other things that I do have competency to judge. And so it's education. And, I think there's a bit of a move to put more compliance professionals onto boards, which I applaud, because I think that we ask different questions and we have different concerns. It's top and bottom.
But until that happens, we still have these 10-minute windows once a quarter or 5-minute windows once a year, depending, to make that impact. And is it education or is it persuasion? Like, how do we put what we care about in terms that like these other people care about as well? I don't know. Like, maybe apathy was the wrong word. Maybe it's just an interest thing, or maybe it's an acumen thing. To your point, somebody who comes up through accounting and CPA and all finance, and now they're on this sort of audit committee. To your point, they're naturally going to acclimate to that original. Like, those are the handles that they use to kind of like navigate through the world and the business and so forth. Many times that's a little myopic. Many times it's a little bit too kind of binary because it's just ones and zeros. It doesn't, it's hard to kind of account for some of the ethereal impacts that a culture of compliance can drive, right? Like, I can't put that into an Excel spreadsheet per se. But it's critical, right? Like, you've worked in organizations that have a true kind of commitment to integrity. Those who haven't, you've seen the positive externalities on the one side, the negative externalities on the other side. And obviously this isn't like a monolith, but my point is there a way that we can, I don't know. I'm just, maybe I'm rambling a little bit here, but like, how can we change our kind of interaction with these folks, in the meantime, before there's someone who has like compliance ethics sort of mind on majority of boards?
Yeah, I think it is partly education. I think board education is really important. There was at least one company I worked for where it's we educate the board because they have access to all the e-learning that we provide to our employees. I'm like, that doesn't help. That e-learning was designed for the employees and not for the board. So I think it's education, it's conversations. It's more than 5 or 10 minutes, which I know is really hard to get. Boards have a lot of demands placed on them and a tough agenda. But just reporting a bunch of numbers, even if you've got, somebody who's making an effort to say, well, what does this number mean? What does that number mean? How are we doing it? What are we doing to improve that number? It feels like a little bit of uninformed interest. And that to me is risky at the board level. And so we're starting to see, better guidance coming out. I think that Boeing motion to dismiss decision was just, for me, a seminal starting point conversation with the board about identifying what's mission critical to this company and are we covering it appropriately? And there were some really shocking quotes in there where you have one of the Boeing engineers saying, I wouldn't put my family on a Boeing airplane.
Jeez. So let's dive into that and unpack it, because I don't think everybody is as like intimate with it. So let's talk about this, and I think there's a lot to kind of draw from this motion to dismiss.
Yeah. So the motion to dismiss was filed. There were a derivative action brought against the individual board members at Boeing following the MAX 787.
Yeah. I think it's 787.
The two crashes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like two really horrible, disastrous crashes, which, the company, scrambled again to do the right thing. What happened? How can we fix this? How can we, how do you begin to compensate the families? But, to really try and get out there. And so the company, there were a lot of lawsuits and a lot of things happening at the company level, but there were, the shareholders saying to the board, you guys are individually accountable for not really ensuring that there were appropriate safety measures in place. And there was no avenue for safety concerns to reach the board. So there were safety concerns that were raised within the Boeing organization that never got elevated, never
Right.
got escalated, and the board never asked for them, right? That there was nobody at the board that said, hey, what about safety? We're on the board of an aircraft company. What is going on with safety? How are we getting reports on safety concerns in this organization? And so the judge and the board representatives, counsel filed a motion to dismiss, saying no, the board's not responsible. This is beyond their purview. They're not there for operational day-to-day management of the company. And the judge dismissed or declined the motion to dismiss. And it's I don't even know how many. It's like a 60-page opinion. It isn't. Sometimes you get motions to dismiss, and it's like, nope, denied. Let's keep going with the lawsuit. But this is like a real barrage of a review of the evidence presented and a real criticism of the board for not identifying this as mission critical. And it's only the starting with Caremark, it's only the one of the most recent in a line of cases about board accountability and the duty of care and the duty to inquire. Right? You can't just sit there on a board and receive information. You also have to ask and make sure that you feel appropriately informed. And so if a compliance officer is coming at you with 10 pages of charts on helpline calls, you really should be saying, well, but wait, what else is going on? What else should I be asking? What is the DOJ? I mean, the DOJ has put together an entire roadmap for boards, I think, to say if a DOJ is evaluating our compliance program, where are we? Have you done a gap analysis against this? Do you have the appropriate resources to answer appropriately to all of these questions? And you have all sorts of benchmark, but let's say the evaluation of corporate compliance programs that the DOJ has issued is a great short primer for the board, in my opinion. If I were on a board, the first thing I would ask the chief compliance officer is, are there any questions here in this very lengthy, comprehensive document that you are unable to answer in a satisfactory way? And let's talk about them. We'd like to know why, what's stopping you. But also, can we talk about what is mission critical to this organization? Because it may not be bribery, corruption. It might be data privacy. It may not be data privacy. It may be records management. So,
Right.
What is under your umbrella, chief compliance officer, and it's a growingly wide umbrella that we should be concerned about, because for this company, this is a high risk area, and we need to understand beyond just some numbers what's being done, what's not being done, and what's coming. What is the impact of artificial intelligence on everything that we do, and how is that being handled? And are you the right person to handle it, or do we have, all these questions? I think need to be happening not only at the executive level, the operational level, but at the board level for what's going on. And I don't know, at a board level, I would be interrogating the chief compliance officer from here to Sunday, because I think there's so much that the chief compliance officer can do and doesn't have the ability to do, doesn't have the knowledge, doesn't have the resources, whatever. There are only so many seats you can plunk your behind down onto. So you fight for a seat at the table for all sorts of things, but then you've got to actually actively sit there, to look into mergers and acquisitions, or to look into layoff plans, or to look into compensation schemes, or to look into environmental impact, or look into how is AI going to be used in the development of our product, and what are the risks there. So.
Yeah. I wish I could wave a magic wand and give sort of a level of boldness to every compliance officer coming into a board meeting to help kind of direct them a little bit more, because most board members are not going to be asking those questions that you just asked. Hey, what don't I know? Most board members, I'll paint with this broad brushstroke with, I mean it, like they're not really thinking about the level of insight that they can get from an ethics and compliance officer who is that circulatory system to the organization, who has that sort of as we said, that master key to every lock in the company, and who's also probably pretty intelligent, again, pretty integrated, and has a really dialed in like risk eye in the context of the industry you're in, and like the footprint of the company and all that kind of stuff. Like it is, we are such a wealth of knowledge, information, insight that the board actually does care about at their like base level. But it seems like we just have such a hard time kind of making that connection. And, I haven't heard about a lot of compliance officers coming in and saying like, you know what, if I were you, if I was on this board, I'd be concerned about A, B, C, and D. And you know what, here's some stats, and I'm ready to talk about those things. But I think our real big risk is A, B, C, and D. I think speaking their language a little bit more, kind of taking that high level, hey, here's 3 messages. Not every single thing is going to like break the company. Here are our big risks. This is what we're talking about. Of course, I have all the hotline data and all the other, backup data that's probably going to make your eyes glaze over. But if we are all aligned and trying to build a great company, or we all feel a similar fiduciary duty to the stakeholders or to the owners or to whoever we answer to, well, then we should be pretty aligned because we're all wearing the same jerseys. You know what I'm saying? But we have to lead. We have to manage up. We have to lead these people forward, because otherwise we're just going to have to cross our fingers and wait to, the board qualification problem gets fixed, or there's a compliance person on every single board, and then, the light bulbs are automatically on. I think it's incumbent on us, as our industry is sort of starting to ramp up, to take advantage of all these things that are in the conversation right now, to push those forward and lead. We have to lead. We have to lead these people forward, because we can't wait for them to say, oh my gosh, this person is freaking smart. We gotta, they have some insights that I don't have. We have to push them, I think.
Yeah, I think so, to take advantage of that, because one of the things when I'm trying to build a compliance team, and one of the arguments I've made several times in several companies for why people should cycle through compliance on their way up. If you've identified somebody high potential that's going to be leaving the company at some point, or function, they should spend a couple of years in compliance, because we have this really, I think, unique perspective across everything, across business units, across functions, across geographies. We're trying to connect the dots. We don't always know what we're doing, but we see it, at least, and there's a lot of attempts, this kind of predictive analytics, which I'm completely seduced by. I love this idea of being able to identify future problems based on a lot of different inputs that you can get from all across the organization, and then trying to leverage things that are happening in the organization to help make that go. Because you don't want a compliance department that's 500 people big, unless you're Siemens, which is what happened to them. I think they went from 12 to 500 and something. Wow. And that's the consequences of getting it wrong. But you want something kind of centralized and tight that's permeating and using and has relationships with all these other parts of the business to get things done. And so I do think that there's a good perspective, and I'm sure that when this goes out, you're going to get a whole bunch of chief compliance officers writing in saying, no, I have a fabulous relationship with my board, and we have really in-depth, long discussions, and I want to tell those people, make sure you keep that job for long, because it just, even when I've worked with really smart boards, it hasn't always been my experience. Now, interestingly, in my kind of downsized career at the moment, I am doing some consulting, and I do have some board members who have individually asked for sit downs, and I sit down and we have just really very frank discussions on, well, what questions should you be asking, and what should you be looking for, and what is a hotspot, and just to protect you personally, do you know where your exposure is, because you're running this company, and courts are increasingly saying, we're gonna get at you for dereliction of duty if you don't meet those responsibilities. So
yeah, it's a really watershed thing with this Boeing thing, and I get the argument. What argument are you going to make? You don't want to get in trouble. You got to say something, but it's so what then? You get all the benefits, you get all this money, you get all these stock options, you pop in 4 times a year, but you have no responsibility at all. It's bizarre. It's totally bizarre. So it's
bizarre to me, and also the way things are framed. When you're prepping for a board meeting, the way things are framed, it's almost like, don't give the board bad news.
It's nuts. Yeah.
It's kind of like the subtle message that you get from executive leadership. It's like, oh nope, they don't need to talk about that. It's like, well, I kind of think they do.
Yeah, it's such a hard thing to navigate. So let's boil down this board qualification issue, because you have some strong feelings on it, and there happen to be my strong feelings for the most part, I think. So what is broken on the board qualification problem, and how do we kind of fix that? And how do we kind of accelerate the fix,
Okay, so if I were going to just put my finger on 3 things, one is compliance and the audit committee. It's not a great fix. I know the audit committee needs to know about things that are going wrong in the company, because there's that kind of exposure, and maybe that goes into the audit committee. But a lot of compliance, I think, the competency of the audit committee isn't really the competency for, leveraging compliance to their own benefit and to the benefit of the company. So I think, point number one is companies need like a risk committee or something that is better staffed and better charged with compliance. Two, I think there needs to be good education. Some companies do better than others in terms of educating the board, not just in compliance, but just generally in their responsibilities and their accountabilities. And, take a look at Delaware law if you're a Delaware corporation and make sure not just when they are onboarded, but on an ongoing basis that there's education on, what is the law saying about what's expected from you and what's not expected from you, right? You're not supposed to be running the company day to day, but there are, bigger issues. And then the third is to just make sure when you're thinking about competency on your board that you've got a good representation. If not, if somebody with a, kind of general counsel background, I think ideally somebody with, compliance background, and I know I'm self-serving here, but is really well suited to board service in terms of asking questions from a different perspective and looking at things from a different perspective and contributing to the conversation from a different perspective, which I think only serves the board well. So those would be, I think, the three things. Get it out of the audit committee, educate the board generally so that the whole board is cognizant, and then getting better competency on the board.
So I love that list. I think that's great. The structure, I don't really have a better answer, but the structure is just wrought with, for lack of a better term, sort of moral hazard, at least at the board level, because like who watches the watchers? You know what I'm saying? Like if there's a new board member coming on, who is it on? Whose responsibility is it to make sure that board member knows exactly what they're looking for? Is that part of the interview process? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm just saying it's all over the place. There's not like an answer that's like, I don't think that I know of that like, okay, there's this sort of onboarding to the board across the board, sorry to use board so much, but like, I mean, that's a big deal. It's like, are we all clear on what our group fiduciary duty is? Like, are we clear on what we're actually, like what our liabilities are, all those kinds of things? I mean, just getting alignment at that point is really kind of critical.
Absolutely. And I think for compliance, there's some things that a lot of boards are doing, but a lot of boards are not doing that are kind of easy fixes. One, how do we protect the chief compliance officer? Do we have an executive session available to them so that they can, if they've exhausted things, up the chain, that they've got the opportunity to speak freely and without fear of retaliation? Is the hiring and the firing of the chief compliance officer kind of reviewed by the board? I think especially the firing. I think if a chief compliance officer resigns or is fired, the board should have the final say there so they can ask the questions like, why is this happening? It's not just to try and shut them up about something, or they're leaving because they're really frustrated. Maybe even think like the chief audit executive usually reports to the head of the audit committee. Maybe the chief compliance officer should have a solid line instead of a dotted line into the board. But I would even start with a dotted line. I think there are companies where the chief compliance officer does not have a kind of formalized access to the board. It goes through the general counsel. And the chief compliance officer and the general counsel should be, aligned and usually, rowing in the same direction. But I think there's a healthy tension between the two roles. There's a whole other soapbox, Nick, for maybe another day is, why compliance is a business function and not a legal function. So reporting into a general counsel can be, kind of a difficult position. But sometimes there isn't even a dotted line into the board to have that kind of connection and ability to carry on that conversation.
Well, that's a pretty good segue into my next question. Can you see my notes or something from where you're at? Maybe not. Okay. So you said you had strong thoughts about compliance moving away from a legal function, and it sounds like you like that move. Tell us more about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just, the more I'm a lawyer by training and a lawyer by, I think that the legal education system and process here really does change the way you think and see the world and express yourself. And I think it's been all to the positive. But compliance is one long exercise in humility about what you really don't know and what you aren't bringing to the table, which is why I think I earlier mentioned you need a lot of people with a lot of good competencies. But, compliance, I'm going to oversimplify, but the role of the general counsel in the law department is very largely defense of the realm, right? Right or wrong, we are going to make sure that this company is in a good position. One of the things as a lawyer that I often got asked is this defensible? Like let's parse out the risk here, and then I will take the business decision. Is this risk worth taking or not taking? I, the business, right? So the lawyer says, look, the law says this. I think we could claim XYZ, but there've been a couple of cases to the contrary. It would be very risky to do this. Here are the consequences. Or the law is here, but it's really unclear. It's unproven. I think we could make the argument, that this is okay, but be prepared because the downside of doing it the wrong, right? So those are healthy, good conversations. That's good legal counseling, providing that kind of assessment. And if things go pear-shaped, I will come up with as many clever arguments as I can to defend the company. The role of the compliance department, I think, the strict role of compliance is compliance with the law and the regulations. But, I use compliance in the broader sense of compliance and ethics, the way so many companies have organized compliance. There's not a separate ethics group. Are we doing the right thing? Is this the correct thing to do, even if it's painful, and even if we're making admissions at this point? Is this the right thing to do? Are we asking the right questions? Are we doing the right thing? Are we predicting problems and coming up with solutions, which is a shared accountability with the law department? But so sometimes there's a small disagreement, right? Especially if, imagine a situation where you have an investigation where the key person who's been harmed is now an ex-employee. And so they're now in an adversarial position to the company. The way the chief compliance officer approaches that situation is very different from the way the general counsel is going to address that position. And the two have to reconcile, and one has to defer to the other. And you usually, need to defer to the legal department for up to a certain point. But there may also be voluntary issues that restrict the business's ability to succeed financially in the short term, in the interest of either long-term gains or in the interest of staying true to its stated mission and desired culture. And that's where I think the compliance officer comes in with a role different from the law department. And then in terms of building the business and counseling the business, I think the chief compliance officer also has a very different perspective. And so I really like to see compliance being integrated into business operations and not going through law. And a lot of times you'll sit side by side, cheek by jowl with your legal colleagues and work collaboratively to come up with good and effective solutions. But you're not always on the same page. And I think that's good. I think that's healthy.
Is good. It is healthy, and it allows for that sort of like positive tension, as you called it, or that at least opportunity for, debate, right? To figure out like, well, what's our true prioritization? Because the priorities of an organization are really just the sum total of everyone's belief of what those priorities are. You know what I'm saying? It's like the averaging of those things, and, cheek to jowl, sometimes we might have some different things, and we have to kind of collectively figure that out. So you're kind of in this, what would it take to get you back in the game? What would the perfect, ethics and compliance role be to get you back in here?
Yeah, I have a dream scenario, which I don't think exists. If it exists, somebody should let me know. But really, where compliance, starting really with the CEO, right? That the CEO has a relationship with the chief compliance officer that a CEO sometimes, but not always, has with the general counsel. This is a trusted advisor. This is someone who's going to, get me really far in terms of this company's success, both from a financial perspective and a sustainability perspective, that we're going to grow the business together and do it in a way that we're all really excited and proud. And so, we're first of all, the chief compliance officer is reporting directly to the CEO, which, I've had that good fortune only once in 4 times. And it made a huge difference in terms of the conversations that I was having and the credibility also in the organization. But really sits in on that kind of strategic planning. Where are we taking the company 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, but even next year. I can't tell you the number of times I've had somebody come into my office and say, oh, by the way, we've acquired this company, please roll out compliance. It's like, you need to be involved in M&A decisions, in market entry decisions, in corporate growth, but also just the bigger strategic. So really having that seat at the table, and then having all the resources you need to free you up to have that seat at the table, because there's so much of the day-to-day and the mundane that's really important in operating a compliance program that needs to be handled by people who are really, we called this a profession, who are really professionals now and not just like dragged in from other parts. You need people who really understand risk assessment, really understand training methodology, really understand investigations, and have that ability to build. So it's the access, it's the kind of that trust relationship, and then it's the resources to make it all happen. And then that has to be kind of communicated and permeating through the entire organization, so that people are really seeing the value and working with you and owning what they need to own. The chief compliance officer does not own compliance. The business owns compliance. Right. The chief compliance officer helps enable it, make it happen. But so often, it's kind of like, oh no, you do compliance. It's great. You do it. We think you're doing a great job. You do it. That's just not workable. So that's my dream job. We report to the CEO, have that really close, trusted advisor relationship, have that permeate the organization, and have sufficient resources to get things done and really prove the business value of compliance. And I don't know. I think that there's a small handful, a really lucky few that have that. But I think by and large, the kind of stress that is put on a CEO to deliver is just enormous. It takes a pretty special person who's going to take that deep breath and say, "Wow, this is important. This is mission critical. It's just as important as talking to my general counsel to say, can I do this? I also want to talk to my chief compliance officer and say, should I do this?" And have that conversation, and then bring in everybody else, finance and everybody else. Can we afford to do this? All those important questions that need to be asked at a very high level. And I've very rarely been brought in to do that on a continuous basis. It's always been a little bit haphazard,
like one off and stuff like that. All right. Well, I'll keep my eyes peeled for that, but that would be, I'd love to get you back on the ethics verse, or just talk to you some more about how much or how different your life was when you had that sort of direct line to the CEO, and what that allowed you to really, it probably made you move a lot faster. It let you make a much bigger impact a lot quicker, but that was probably pretty interesting. Before we wrap up, just tell me quickly about, I think you're speaking at in Atlanta coming up, right? At the Women's Conference?
Yeah, I've got two things coming up. Actually, I'm speaking at PLI is doing a really good compliance conference. The same week that Atlanta Compliance Week is doing Women in Compliance. I think their inaugural one. So I'm talking with Matt Galvin, who's at the DOJ now, on data, which is one of my real passions, not my capabilities, but one of my passions. So that's going to be exciting. That's in New York on Tuesday, and then Wednesday in Atlanta, talking about training with Rebecca Walker, who's just like,
oh, cool.
So I'm just so in awe of the people that I get to meet and work with in this profession. So the two of us are going to talk about training, kind of the way you and I have been talking across the board, because there's so much to discuss.
All right. Well, if you hear some light heckling, you're going to see me in the back. Okay, it's going to be fun. It'll be playful heckling.
So awesome. I love heckles. I love your perspective, Nick. I love your energy, and I just want to thank you and Ethico too for all the things that you do to really help support and highlight and promote this profession. And just like your energy and the kind of ideas that you contribute are just invaluable.
Wow, I got chills hearing that. Thank you so much for saying that. I'm just so excited about this inflection point that we're at. Like, I believe it for sure. I mean, 10 years from now, our profession is going to look so different. Our workplaces are going to look so different. And it's because the moves that we're making now, we're going to be making different moves now than we felt comfortable making, 5-10 years ago. And it's really going to, it's nice to work in an industry that can make an actual impact. You know what I'm saying?
I want to give a shout out to my students too, because the people coming into this profession, they're just going to carry it.
Totally. Well, I love your work. It's so fun to connect with you. I'll see you in Atlanta. Until next time.
Absolutely. That's fantastic, Nick. Thank you.
See you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.